Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you, Kate. I hope you can all hear me all right with technology. Thank you very much to you all for letting me be part of this opportunity to contribute to the memory of Richard Taylor. I find it remarkable that over the years I've been to many conferences internationally and in Australia, and yet there are very few voices that resonate in my mind. Richard Taylor's voice is one such voice. He conveyed for me, as I think he does for all of you, not just passion, the essential element that I think we all have for issues around dementia, but intelligence and a melancholy that commanded attention and a response. The melancholy perhaps the result of being ahead of his times, and impatience for what he rightly argued was a compelling case for justice. I cannot claim, unfortunately, to know Richard the man, or to know what he meant to his family, or to many of you. But on the two occasions I met Richard, set aside the many emails, I was left with the indelible impression of what he stood for, the power of his mind. Richard was what he preached, simply a great individual. I shared a parallel session with Richard on one occasion at the 2009 ADI conference in Singapore on consumer involvement. I followed Richard, which was not much fun and a daunting experience. My policy and bureaucratic insights were not much of a match for Richard's passion and intellect. I have still in my 2009 consumer focus folder, the one I developed for Kate, the talk he gave together with his plenary presentation. When I next met Richard in Puerto Rico with members of the Dementia Alliance, it was his sense of melancholy that was the most forceful and enduring. A conviction that despite all his wonderful words and passion, that nothing had really much changed, and perhaps ever would. I could only give Richard my different view, which was that as a result of his efforts and those of many others, social attitudes to dementia since the turn of the century have indeed changed to being more inclusive, albeit slowly. I said much the same in emails to Richard. I gave my commitment to Richard, as I have to Kate and others, that as chair of ADI, I would do all I could to make ADI an inclusive organisation. I am personally delighted that ADI and DAI are partners, and that there is a developing programme of activity, including the possibility of DAI conferences, which might reassure Richard, wherever he is now, that we are on the right path. These are testimony to Richard's memory, and perhaps the best kind. I repeat that pledge that through ADI and country-based groups of people with dementia, ADI will work for a world where people with dementia, in the words of the Scottish Charter of Rights, are able to exercise their rights at every stage of the illness. I extend my sympathies and those of the staff at ADI to Linda and her family, and Richard's fellow advocates around the world that he helped inspire. Thank you again for this opportunity to contribute to the memory of Richard Taylor. Many thanks.
Thank you indeed, Glenn. That was a wonderful tribute to Richard. And Dr. Alan Power, you're our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And hello to everybody out there. Thank you, Glenn, for those wonderful words. I got to know Richard quite a bit over the last several years, and I just want to reminisce a little bit. I'll draw from a couple comments I made in a tribute I posted, but some other comments as well. I first became aware of Richard during my own struggles to explain to people why I didn't want to give people with dementia antipsychotic drugs. And this was back around 2006 when it was still pretty common and few people were questioning the practice. And what I found was that I was having trouble putting into words why I didn't think was the right approach. And so I started writing and with the intent of writing a book. And it was along about that time that a colleague of mine introduced me to Richard's blog. Richard at that time was engaging in his own personal therapy by blogging about his experiences. And that blog eventually became his book, Alzheimer's from the Inside Out. And so I wrote Richard and told him how much I appreciated. Are you okay? Okay. Told how much I appreciated that perspective. And then, just as you, Glenn, I got to meet Richard in person for the first time at ADI 2009. I was lucky enough to have been asked by Jane Verity and Hillary Lee to co-present, so that I was able to get there and meet him. And every time Richard speaks, there's a little paradigm shift for me. And the one that got me in Singapore was when he said, "I'm not dying of a fatal disease. I'm living with a chronic disability." And I know people like Kate and Chris and Mick are talking about this a lot nowadays. But for me in 2009, to start to shift that mindset to disability as opposed to fatal disease, and the potential for everything from engagement to advocacy to rights was very mind-opening for me and very inspiring. I think the next time we met in person was a conference we gave together in Wisconsin. And once again, Richard was challenging the audience. It was one of the few conferences that actually had somebody living with Alzheimer's on the planning board. And but he didn't let them off for that. He got up there, and I remember him starting his talk by saying, "Thank you for inviting me to speak. I know that most of you learned about Alzheimer's from people who don't have Alzheimer's, and they in turn learned about it from people who didn't have Alzheimer's. And isn't it wonderful you've finally invited somebody with Alzheimer's to come to your conference and tell you what it's like." So that was that really. And you know, Richard did have that sense of humor. He could be biting and pointed in his comments, but he really had a marvelous sense of humor. And the times I spent with Richard were often filled with just tons of laughter. I also appreciate the melancholy that Glenn talked about. I know that during the last couple of years, particularly when he first had his cancer diagnosis 2 years ago, he began to feel the clock ticking more urgently and began to think, what can I do in the time I have left that can have value? How can I leave a lasting mark? And so I think, Glenn, when you saw him in Puerto Rico, he probably was feeling a lot of that. I will tell you, and kudos once again to you and Kate and everybody who was involved with ADI 2015. The involvement and advocacy of people living with a diagnosis, over 100 people present at the conference, to me was a huge accomplishment. I've told Jason Burton as much and Rhonda Parker as well. And I know that Richard was greatly moved to hear about the advocacy. He was unable to make it. It was before his cancer had come back, or at least reestablished itself, but for a lot of logistic reasons, he couldn't get there. But he was so happy to hear that we had taken that leap. And I'm so glad to hear that you're interested in moving that forward, because for me, once again, that was bringing the people with the lived experience who I consider the real experts into the picture. Richard and I have spoken more. Judy, who's on the call, produced, her husband co-produced a couple of DVDs with Richard and me speaking that we've made together. We've traveled around everywhere from Alaska to Georgia with Kim also on the call to make presentations. Kim has also recorded videos of Richard. One of the great things about Richard is his use of the word hello. And to my knowledge, that stemmed from an experience he had early on when he was still feeling isolated and depressed and grieving his diagnosis, and found his isolation was made worse by the fact that his friends stopped coming to see him. And finally, after feeling sorry for himself, he called up one of his good friends and said, "Why don't you come to see me anymore?" And his friend said, "Richard, I just didn't know what to say." And Richard's response was, "How about hello?" And so often when I'm talking to people who may be professional carers or volunteers who would like to engage somebody, but they're not quite sure how to do it, I just go back to Richard and I say, why don't you just go and sit down and say hello and see what happens? You don't have to make them do anything. You don't have to accomplish anything. Just make that connection and see what happens. And so many things I learned. I mentioned in my tribute the time at ADI in Toronto. Actually, it was at the Changing Melody conference the day before that was put on by and for people living with a diagnosis, where a gentleman came up and asked the two of us a question when we were talking together. And Richard, being the usual gentleman, kind of deferred to me to give my answer, and I tried to answer it in my doctorly way. And then after I finished, Richard answered in a totally different way that spoke to the feeling, the emotion, the fears behind the question, not the fact of the question, and answered the man's needs in a way that I couldn't begin to appreciate. And I learned a lot from him just watching him. I saw him in Alaska facilitating a support group. There was people with dementia and their loved ones all in the group, and there were so many people crammed in that little conference room that they had to bring extra chairs. I'm sure some of the people must have had bladders that were screaming, but for over 2 hours, people sat there and didn't move a muscle. And he just was so sensitive. He heard what was said. He heard what was not said. He proceeded to make sure that everybody was included, brought people together, speaking with each other, not just, as often happens, facilitator to participant in dyads. And once again, just so many things I learned from being around Richard. And I guess with all that, I'll just conclude with, as I did in my tribute, one thing he said to me the last time I went to visit him at his house last November, when I asked him, because I knew he was not getting out, we actually worked together to try to come up with a strategy for him to get out more, because he'd felt so isolated by his cancer and his treatment that had left him so weak. And we did actually get together in San Francisco the following February, which is the last time I got to see him. But in November, I said, Richard, what's the message? What's the core message you want me to tell people? And he said, after thinking, people have to recognize the essential humanness in others. And he followed that up by saying what I consider remarkable, that I believe as people progress with dementia, their humanity increases. And that is so counter to the declinist narrative that we often have about living with dementia. And to me, it just really brought it back to the bottom line, that this is really about humanity and preserving humanity at all costs. And so I thank him for all he taught me as a person who can never truly understand the experience, but someone who I'm flattered to say he thought got it more than most non-experts. And it reminded me, I was in a conference where I was talking to a gentleman who was living with dementia and part of a support group with people living with a diagnosis and family members. And he said, we had a meeting recently where we tried to decide how we should identify ourselves vis-a-vis our loved ones. And we decided that we're the haves and they're the have-nots. And I thought that was great, because it just kind of flipped the paradigm and said, this is a privilege we have. In a way, it's a struggle, but in a way, it's a privilege that we have a perspective that we have to share with others. So Richard certainly shared that with me. I know there are other people that want to say things, so I'm going to get off, and thank you for the opportunity to speak a little bit up front. And we will all remember Richard, I'm sure, and the important impact he's had on the world for people who live with changing cognitive abilities. Kate, I think you're muted. There we go. There we go. Okay.
Thank you, Al. Your tribute and Glenn's is evident of the impact that Richard's had on not just people with dementia and our families, but on the vast majority of professionals around the world who are working in the dementia sector. Thank you for that tribute. I too have written a tribute to Richard on behalf of Dementia Alliance International, and I'll start with hello. Christopher Reeves once said, a hero is an ordinary individual who finds the strength to persevere and endure in spite of overwhelming obstacles. Richard will continue to be one of my heroes. I had hoped to write an obituary to honour Richard. Someone online had suggested we should write an obituary, but when I looked up on how to write one, I was directed to all sorts of suggestions, including personal details, where he was born, those types of family history, personal history of his, and I didn't have them. I've only known Richard since he had dementia. So I realised the best place I could do was to write from my heart. And so I decided to begin with a haiku version of an elegy about Richard. So often less is more. Richard Taylor, kind, intelligent, passionate, real and feisty, deepest heart and soul. Members of Dementia Alliance International are deeply saddened by the death of Richard Taylor, who passed away at his home on 25th of July due to cancer. and we extend our sympathy and condolences to his wife, Linda, son, Jason, and his whole family and closer friends. We hope they know how much he was loved and will continue to positively influence the dementia community. As current chair of DAI, it is an honour and privilege to lead DAI and to represent our members today in remembering and honouring him. I was privileged to work with him, privileged to call him a friend, and lucky enough to be in attendance at one of those early breakfast meetings hosted by ADI in 2012. In his final newsletter, he started with, "Hello again, still Richard here, still living with more and more symptoms of dementia." He always began his presentations and videos with, "Hello, my name is Richard Taylor, and I have dementia, probably of the Alzheimer's type." It is such a simple word, and it does epitomise the simple humanity that we all still have, in spite of our deficits caused by dementia. Richard was inspirational, and his influence was significant, not only on his family and close friends, but on a vast number of people living with a diagnosis of dementia of this or that type, and those people that care for us, paid and unpaid, around the world. He was a founding member of Dementia Alliance International and had the dream for this group many years before. Together with him, DAI was created, an advocacy and support group of, by, and for people with dementia. As current chair and member, I can only hope that we will continue to honour him appropriately as individuals and through this group. His death is a devastating loss for each and every one of us as individuals, and for his family in particular, but also for the global dementia community. I first met Richard online late in 2008, having found excerpts of some of his writings via Dr. Google. We communicated regularly after that via email, and before we met, we'd said we felt like kindred spirits on the same journey. I'm sure there are thousands of people who feel that same connection. Richard led the way for me, as he was the first person with dementia who not only spoke up for living beyond the diagnosis, he also showed it was possible and showed how. His writings, in many ways, saved my life, and I often said to him, I felt like he literally saved my life. He saved me from the downward spiral of anguish, depression that dementia can become. He inspired me to live differently. He inspired me to write. He inspired me to look beyond the deficits that dementia insists we have to put up with. There was very little that taught people how to live beyond the diagnosis of dementia. Richard Taylor taught me that. He inspired me not to continue downwards. He inspired me to face the diagnosis honourably and with courage. He inspired me to find meaning in my journey of dementia. Before I met Richard I think I've got my notes mixed up. As with any critical illness, and I know Richard and I agreed strongly on this point, we both spoke up for research into improving the care and outcomes for people already diagnosed with dementia, not just for a cure. We must never forget the people who are now living with dementia, more than 47 million of us around the world. Our needs now are just as important as finding a cure. Helping people in the future must not be at the cost of those of us living with dementia. Thank you, Richard Taylor. We sincerely hope your family and close friends get some idea today of the sense of love we all felt for you. And get some comfort. Our sympathy again to you all. Finally, many people have been asking who will take Richard's place in this fight for equality. Who will be the voice for dementia? I'm one person who will continue to do that. I know there are hundreds and thousands of other people who are equally committed, who've been inspired by Richard. Just like Richard always said in his blogs and articles, stand up and speak out. And I feel now very confident that we will continue with his work. Together we can and we will change the world for people with dementia. Thank you. And I'd now like to call on John Sandblom, who was one of our co-chairs when Dementia Alliance first set up. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Kate. I was reminded when Dr. Al Power was speaking that the first time, I have to admit in my ignorance, a lot, probably a symptom of my dementia, the first time Richard ever mentioned the name Al Power, I thought, who the heck is Al Power? But he was always excited about when he was gonna, be speaking with you, Al. So you should take that to heart. He was obviously very fond of you. So, and for me, Richard was a friend. I considered him a good friend, a colleague, and definitely a mentor. As Richard was a mentor to probably all of us living with a diagnosis. And he didn't mentor in an active way. It was just that he lived to such high standards and worked so hard at advocacy, and his heart was so much in it that you couldn't help but be inspired by what Richard did. There's just, if you understood what he was doing, you had to be inspired, because it was just nothing short of amazing. The first time I ever met him in person was actually when the chapter in my area brought him in to speak at a conference that was just for people diagnosed, and they brought him in the night before, and my local support group got to have dinner with him, and the gal that ran that saved a spot sitting right next to Richard for me, because she thought Richard and I would get along well. And that was the night our friendship started, and it grew from that point. But Richard was just such a likable, nice guy that it was just about impossible to not like Richard. He was just such a personable guy, which was definitely evidenced at conferences with the amount of people that would be chasing after him to talk to him. It was that was an amazing experience for me. And in Puerto Rico in 2014, he and I shared a hotel room, and that was probably my most treasured memories of Richard, because that's when I really understood the depth of his sense of humor and his light side, because until you were in situations like that, away from serious advocacy, sometimes you didn't see the sense of humor. And he had a wonderful sense of humor, and was just a lot of fun to be around. And frankly, we did so much talking and laughing that we shorted ourselves on sleep probably that entire conference. I can remember one of the last days he slept in and skipped some stuff, because I think he was so exhausted because we weren't getting enough sleep and that kind of thing. But that was a wonderful experience. And I'm so happy that I did share a room with him, because it was such a great experience. But I haven't even hardly looked at what I had written here, but Richard, one thing I always admired about him that is probably something harder for me is that Richard would say what he thought. And sometimes he ruffled some feathers and he didn't care. He was going to say what he thought and what he thought was right. And you know, I admired that, you know, whether he was right or wrong, boy, you were going to know his opinion. And, you know, I mean, that's fantastic. That's, you know, people should let their opinion be known. Talking about the melancholy side, I did see that often where he would be frustrated that things weren't moving fast enough or changing fast enough. And I think probably most of us that live with the disease feel that at times. And so I think that's probably just the ordinary human condition to get a little frustrated at times. But I'm just one of many, many people that will sorely miss Richard, but will always carry the influence that he had in my life. And I'm very thankful for that, and very thankful that I had the opportunity to know Richard and be a fellow founding member of DAI with him. He was very generous as a founding member of ADI, and very important to the organization starting. So one last thing I'll leave as a memory was that in Puerto Rico, he asked me to help him with one of his presentations. It was on stigma, and he had signs made up with lots of different words that stigmatize us. And as he'd talk about each one, it'd get hung around my neck. And I did my best to act like the weight was pulling me down, and then ended up crumpled on the ground with the last sign. And Richard got such a kick out of the fact that a number of people rushed up to take pictures of me crumpled over like that, because it had worked. His visual had worked effectively enough that a lot of people wanted a picture of it. And he kept teasing me that I'd had my picture taken a lot more than him because of it. But, you know, that was just him joking around. It really just meant that his presentation, the way he designed it, was incredibly effective. So, you know, that was just one of many amazing experiences. And I appreciate everybody coming today. And that's all I've got, Kate.
Thank you so much, John. I remember that stigma presentation, and DAI, we tried to record all of the presentations in Puerto Rico made by people with dementia, and that was the one where our camera failed, so we don't have a copy of it, but it was incredibly powerful. I'm now going to hand over to friends and members who want to pay their own personal tribute to Richard, and I've had to put them in some sort of order, and some people have asked to go early because they need to leave. But I'm going to start with Helga Rohrer from Germany, who's also a board member of DAI, but she's also the chair of the European Dementia Working Group. Helga, are you able to speak now? You just need to unmute, Helga. Fell into my trap. Helga, I'm sorry, you have to unmute.
Like this?
Yeah.
Is it okay?
I've done it for you now. Thanks, Helga.
Good. Dear Linda, dear friends, dear all listening today, I remember Richard as a straight and forward personality. I remember him as a big thinker, an analytic mind, and a great friend. I first met Richard, it was about 9 years ago, at an ADI conference. I was just diagnosed with Lewy body, and I was sitting very shy. It was a group of people. Richard made it possible that we were organized. We were about 4, about 7, and we were listening to him. And I was very impressed by his way, by the power of his words. I was impressed by his way, how he spoke at the conference. And today I must tell you that was a crucial moment in my life, because it gave me such a confidence, and I started to have confidence in myself and to say, dementia is not the end. It is just a different way of living. Starting from that moment, Richard was a great inspiration for me. I also started writing, and I wrote 2 books, and we had the possibility. A big German newspaper, Frankfurter Allgemeine, invited only authors with dementia. The title was Brilliant Minds and Still Writers and Having Dementia. And we met in Frankfurt, and I see in front of my eyes, Linda, you were sitting in the first row, Richard, Christine Bryden with Paul, James McKillop with Maureen, and myself. We were the only writers at that time with dementia. Yes, Richard was an inspiration, and from that moment on, I started myself to speak up, to be a strong advocate. I remember it was 2013, and Europe said, especially it was Germany, Austria, Switzerland, that we make a DVD, Richard and myself. The title was Dementia and Esprit, and it was a milestone in, I think, in dementia history, and it was a great challenge in society. How is it possible to speak about dementia and esprit? Richard, that was your power, and I was so proud to be with you on this DVD. Today, I myself, all champions of dementia, owe you so much, Richard, and we will continue your work. And we, together, we will stand up and speak up. Thank you.
Thank you, Helga. I'm trying to see whether Kathy Borry is amongst us, because Kathy really did want to say a few words about her friendship with Richard. And Kathy, are you there? I don't think she's there at the moment. So Amy Shives, we have, I've got you next in order to say a few words about Richard. You just need to unmute, Amy.
Got it. Well, I do not have eloquent words, so my apology. Mine is heartfelt. I never had the honor of meeting him in person. That would have been an extreme life goal met had I been able to. I've had the honor of being in his support group that meets on Thursdays for a really long time, and someone would know that. I'm a former DAI board member, and I suppose that's how I found it. But the small group of us that were able to basically sit at his knee and run things off of him individually was miraculous, to say the least. I respected him on so many levels. One of the levels I respected him is I'm a former counselor. And to watch him work and to watch him speak to the people at whatever level they were emotionally, he was a giant, literally, other than his height. He was a giant. I once told him, I wished I could have had a college course with him as the professor. And he just did one of these at me. And I really do. I would have loved to have taken a course and just to listen to him. I'm not sure I would have done well on tests because I would have just been so mesmerized. But I had the honor to be with him weekly, to watch him in his modeling humbleness, which I've always known I needed to work on. I can be quite direct. He had a talent for deciding when to be direct. I learned from him there. I learned so much, and for me individually, I was honored in my advocacy work to have him as a mentor. He was absolutely essential in the work I have done, because I of course have hit on all of the obstacles and stupid people, and he was there to help me through it more quickly than had I had to figure it out. So he confirmed with me the challenges I was having, and it felt good to have a kindred spirit saying, yeah, they are that way, yeah, and I could move on. He's responsible for me getting to where I have been with my advocacy. He is responsible for me achieving, being able to speak at the forum for the Alzheimer's Association. I was the only person with dementia this year to be allowed to speak. I was given 3 minutes. So we've got a 4-day forum. The only person with dementia allowed to speak was given 3 minutes. And that was me. And he made that all possible because he was able to balance me and push me forward and mentor me, or I'd have gotten mad and quit. So I just kept staying the course, and with him behind me, he had gone before me with this group. He had been an initial member of this group of advisors for this association, telling me the stories that he went through. It just made me more capable. So my sadness is that I wasn't finished being mentored by Richard. I have the ability to hear you all who met him and your different viewpoints that I don't have, but that's all I have. It's just really hard. He's irreplaceable to me.
Thank you so much, Amy. And you did meet him online, which these days is almost as good as meeting in person, but not quite as good as a real hug. Next on my list of order is one of our members, DAI members in Australia, Mick Carmody, who's become a very active DAI member. He's taken over running Richard's Thursday support group, which means he gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do that. He also runs an Australian support group. He's working on running a New Zealand support group for people with dementia. So I'd like to welcome you, Mick, and just remind you to unmute your speakers. I'll see if I can help.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kate. I was fortunate enough to be part of Richard's weekly support group, thanks to Kate and to John. Before joining the group, I was at my lowest point in my life with nowhere to go. The weekly support group started by Richard are so empowering. The people I meet with every week in the group are a huge part of what saved my life. Each week, Richard would share his knowledge, his wisdom, and his wit, always making us laugh. One thing I remember was he said to his wife, I don't remember what was said, but I know we laughed a lot and it made me feel good. On another occasion, we were talking about giving presentations, and he said, I never worry about forgetting where I am or making a mistake, as people just think it's part of dementia anyway. The last thing Richard said to me 3 weeks before he passed away was, Mick, I am so proud of you and everything you have achieved. That will stay with me forever. I feel proud and honoured to receive such a high accolade from my friend and mentor, a man with such wisdom and knowledge who was willing to share with anybody. Each week, just by listening to Richard, that would inspire and motivate me to push harder, go against the grain, stand up and be counted. His mind was always sharp. In the last month before he passed away, he told us that he'd stopped answering emails and cut back on everything. He told us that all he wanted to do was come to the Thursday group. That was his wish. The dementia world will never be the same again, and his legacy must and will be carried on. His vision of having Zoom support groups spread across the globe is slowly coming to fruition. Here in Australia, we've got one weekly group going at the moment. We've got another one coming up in a few months, and as Kate said, there'll be another one starting in New Zealand. I recently gave a presentation this week at a large aged care facility, and I'm sure he was standing beside me because I've never felt so relaxed in giving a presentation before. R.I.P. Richard Taylor.
Thank you so much, Mick. I just had a message that Kathy Greenblatt, who would really like to say a few words, has to go soon. So, Kathy, if you're there and would like to share your love for Richard now, please unmute and join us.
Thank you, Kate. I was just trying to write a message to everybody saying hello to so many friends of mine as well as friends of Richard, and I'm sorry that some of the rest of you have not yet become friends, but I hope we'll stay in touch despite the glue that Richard provided between so many people. All of you who know me know there's no way I could have written a 2-minute statement. 2 hours, that would have been easy, but 2 minutes is not possible. So I just scribbled a few notes and said that'll get me to shut up very rapidly in my time. But Richard was a colleague. Richard was a partner in many things. The last conversation we had, the last conversations we were having were going about 2 or 3 times a week, and emails back and forth with such a flurry. It would be hard to imagine that the man had ever had a day of being ill. And the last conversations we had, we were discussing whether I was going to see them in Houston on Saturday, or whether he and Linda, even better, were coming to Palm Springs to visit me as soon as I got home on Sunday. So it was pretty much of a shock when Linda called me on the afternoon of the 25th and gave me the news that has so shattered all of us. I've written notes about 20 different occasions on which Richard was a friend, a colleague, and everything else, and there'd be no way to even begin to share them. But I think that those of you who have spoken have captured that we all know the same man, even if some of us know him in person, some of us know him in writing, some of us know him as a mentor online, he's influenced everybody so strongly, and I think this is a testimony that all of us are gathered here now and have been before that and will after that. Jason, his son, sent a message the other day that I think echoes a bit of what Kate just said. Who's going to carry this on? And I think the answer is everybody. There's not going to be another Richard Taylor. There never will be another Richard Taylor. But But the spirit of Richard Taylor abides in all of us, and I think we can all carry that on. And that's the way we honor him and the way we will honor him. So thanks, Kate, for letting me in.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And I think that's the reality. Richard didn't want only people with dementia to stand up and speak out for our rights. He wanted everybody to do that, to join us in that. And it's testament to him that so many researchers, clinicians, professionals working in the dementia sector are doing that with us now, you know, by our side. Thank you so much. Unless anyone's desperate to leave shortly, I'll just keep going on the list I had, because I've had a few people ask to be, you know, in a certain order so that they can leave. So, Laurie LeBay, I have you next on my list, if you'd like to say a few words.
Yeah, I sure would. I don't have anything formal prepared either. And part of that is because Richard, to me, was probably one of the most authentic speakers I've ever heard, and didn't seem, anyways, to me, very scripted. He spoke from the heart. He was a man. He was a friend. He was an icon. He was a mentor to many. And to see him and what he has accomplished in such a short period of time, you know, he would always say, I am just one voice, which we all know is true, and how he has blossomed so many others to speak up and take a stand. Not just people with dementia, but their care partners and professionals alike. He has really helped build collaborations around the world and was just such a true gift. And his voice, his work will live way beyond his physical time here with us. And I know I still feel him in my heart, as I'm sure most of you do, who know him as well. He is just, he's going to go down in history as really changing the way we look at our perceptions, how we interact and engage with one another, how we value life, how we want to live life. And I can't thank him enough. So thank you, Kate, for giving me some time. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Laurie. I've just had a message from one of our DAI members, Leo White, and I didn't know you were wanting to talk, Leo, but please, if you want to take the floor now.
Yeah, thank you. I did send a note in the other day, but no worries, I'm getting to talk. Like Amy, I never met Richard in person, and only had, I think, 3 webinars because I joined the board of DAI fairly recently. I was only on 3 webinars with him, but I was deeply struck by 3 things. One, his obvious intelligence, and his wisdom, which is different. And the other thing I thought he did so well was his ability to cut to the chase, cut to the heart of the matter. And whenever someone like Richard dies, I'm always reminded of the words of John Donne, or Donne, I'm never sure how to pronounce it, which were written almost 400 years ago. And excuse me, because I have to read it. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well if a promontory were, as well as any manner of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never sin to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls the thee. I think a little of us all died on the 25th of July. So rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. It's very, very heartfelt. The next on my list of speakers, and I apologise for not knowing how to pronounce your name, Yvette.
It's pronounced Yuda. Can you hear me?
We can now. Thank you. Yeah.
Anyway, it's pronounced Yuda.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I have to tell you that from the very first time I met Richard back in 2006, when we were both doing the Alzheimer's Foundation conference in Dallas, he had a profound influence on me, and I didn't realize it actually until later, when I found myself like recalling things that he'd said in his presentation there. I had tried as a writer and a person who worked with as a counselor with people with caregivers, and at that time only a few people with dementia themselves, but mostly with caregivers. I tried to empathize, but it's so hard when you're not dealing, directly with people who are living with a disease and are able to talk to you. And that was the thing that opened my eyes. Richard could talk about living with it and be honest about what he was going through, and at the same time, helping us to empathize where he was. So to me, he's one of the most profound figures in this whole area. I think he has single-handedly changed the conversation. And but I also have to thank his family, because I know that without their support, it would have been very, very difficult to do this for him. And of course, Kim McCrae and her husband Frank for bringing him out into the open with their videos. He was an incredible person, and I found myself stunned when I heard that he had passed away. Somehow he felt immortal, Even with the dementia, I knew that, of course, eventually, with the cancer, eventually, but you don't want to believe it, and it was very difficult. This is very hard. I've gone through about 5 Kleenexes since we started, you guys, and I'm so glad that you're continuing his work, and I'll be there with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think next on the program, only because of time zones, Laura Bowley, if you would like to say a few words. Laura was instrumental in assisting Dementia Alliance International setting up as a volunteer.
I'm here. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Uh-oh. Can you hear me? Anybody?
We can hear you.
Okay, good, because I'm on my phone. Thanks, Michael. I discovered I could cook dinner and do this at the same time, so this is good. This is going to be hard. I met Richard at a Changing Melodies conference in Toronto in the fall of 2008. And I just want to say, it's so great to look around the screen and see so many people who I know are here because of Richard. And I don't just mean you're here to give tribute to Richard, but you are here doing what you're doing because of Richard. And that he's the one thing that ties us all together in our work. And I met him in Toronto at a Changing Melodies conference in 2008. And we went out for dinner after the conference and never looked back. We worked on several projects together, including the I Can, I Will website with Alzheimer's Disease International. And at one time, we had so many projects and our names appeared together so often that more than once I had people assume that I was his wife. And I'm really sorry, Linda. In the summer of 2012, we decided to do webinars online. Richard was adamant that the focus of these webinars would be on encouraging people with dementia to stand up and speak out. I think we did an okay job keeping that focus, and we were adamant that any topic and speaker for these webinars, which we called a meeting of the minds, to reflect the conversations that we hoped would take place between people with dementia and everyone else, that these webinars had to have relevance to people with dementia. We ran these together for a couple of years. Richard more than once saving my butt when my internet connection gave out, and he just blithely kept on talking. In the back of my mind, I hoped that these webinars, which did not require any travel, would provide a forum for Richard to continue to bring his voice to the world even after he could no longer travel, except he kept on traveling even after his first bout with cancer. Richard and I were very successful in starting this conversation online, that's for sure. From the conversations that started between people with dementia during a meeting of the minds came online support groups via video conferencing, which provided peer support to people with dementia, and Mick already spoke very eloquently to that. And Café Le Brain, the online memory cafe, also resulted from the webinars. And together with Maureen Matthews of To Whom I May Concern, we ran 2 online theater projects with people with dementia who met during the webinars. And ultimately, Dementia Alliance International resulted from daring to ask what if during a Café Le Brain. In late 2014, Richard left the DAI board to pursue other projects. I decided that a meeting of the minds, Café Le Brain, and the support groups should live on with DAI in their rightful place with people with dementia. I'm going on to start new conversations via webinars and online workshops for everyone, along with what I'm thinking of calling hello clubs in honor of Richard, who always started his messages with hello, in the belief that we must say hello, never goodbye. I learned from Richard to live life with purpose. Indeed, he helped to shape my purpose. And I can honestly say life was never the same after meeting him in 2008. The Hello Clubs will include a project that he and I cooked up years ago, Dementia U, a boot camp for people with dementia and their families to teach them a different way of living with dementia, a life filled with love and purpose. And the clubs themselves will provide the environment to put into action his ideas about living with purpose. It's our collective job now to continue with Richard's work, but I will miss my partner in crime. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Laura. We have next, if you're still there, Kim McRae, if you'd like to say a few words.
It's hard to go after Laura. That made me cry. So I've got my big rag. I just got a dish towel. You know, Kleenex wasn't cutting it. Hello, everybody. I am feeling so much love here with all of you. I didn't write something up. First of all, I just want to say Richard absolutely changed my life. He changed the course of who I am and what I'm supposed to be when I grow up. Linda and Jason, we haven't met each other yet, but I so feel like I know you and your whole family. Thank you so much for sharing Richard with me and Frank so many times throughout all these years. We were so lucky to be able to have him in our home and to share so much time together. I met Richard in 2006 at a Pioneer Network conference, and I was the caregiver for my mom, Barbara, who was living with dementia. I didn't yet know about how to be an enabler and a supporter and a care partner, but we met each other because I knew that life with dementia could be better. And I was out there looking for how to help make it better. And I met Richard. And my mom couldn't talk like Richard talked, but I could talk to Richard about things. And he and I had some of the most amazing conversations. And I'm really fortunate to have been able to travel some paths with him. Linda and Jason and all of you Thank you so much for sharing him with everybody. My regret is that I couldn't get things done fast enough for Richard. And I had to take a little break because I was having to deal with some things with my own mom and my own family. But I promise that I will continue to stand up and speak out and help figure out ways to continue spreading all the wonderful seeds that he planted in all of us. And on behalf of Richard, I'd like to raise this glass of Heinz ketchup. For those of you that know, he loves it. So I'm raising the Heinz ketchup in honor of Richard. And I send my love to the family from me and Frank. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. Yeah, maybe we all need a sheet. Maybe that tea towel's not quite big enough. We've got a couple more people who are online who would like to speak, and then I've got some tributes that people have asked me to read out. John Ziesel, are you, if that's how I say your last name, are you still with us? I've just unmuted you, John.
Ah, okay. Thank you. It's Ziesel, but it's okay.
Sorry.
So, no problem. So I just wanted to take two things. One is, in the beginning of my book, I'm Still Here, I have a long piece of an email that Richard sent. And I think that his words and the way he expressed himself and the way he said, I'm still here, will go on forever. So I think that we all owe him a debt by what he said and the number of people he's influenced. But I wanted to tell a brief story, and it's a story about how Richard made sure that nobody underestimated him and others with dementia. And Linda and Richard was participating in a seminar I was running on non-pharmacologic activities in Spain. And Richard and Linda both came. Richard was a participant, Linda was there with him. And during the meeting, I was talking and Richard didn't say very much. And at one point, somebody said, well, you really ought to let Richard talk. And Richard very elegantly didn't say very much at that moment. But later on, I said, Richard, what do you think about that? And Richard said, if I have something to say, I'll say it. And it was very profound because he was really saying, here was this well-meaning professional who was part of this conversation, and he was fully there, and he was fully a participant, and it was a very moving event, and it's the only time that we've been able to do that, although we met very often, to really see him expressing this, not that I have dementia, but that I have the ability to say what I need to say when I need to say it about important issues. And he participated in this seminar, not as a person with dementia, but as a person with a lot of experience in dementia and in activities and programming. And it was very moving. And he was always, I think, aware that he had a voice. And I think his strident speeches and his strident way of speaking was not at all too much. I think he chose a level of communication and of anger when it was time to be angry, as well as a level of empathy and kindness that were very appropriate. And I think he had an emotional intelligence in our whole field, whether somebody has dementia, whether somebody is a care partner, whether somebody's a family member, whether somebody is a provider, that we all could learn from. And that I think it was important to realize the importance of being angry at injustice and the importance of being angry when people were not treated well. And the story about that Puerto Rico conference where he had people put on, all the stigma phrases on someone's, on your shoulders, You know, that's Richard. I mean, this is in your face kind of stuff. And I think we should not forget that. That in your face is really what he presented us. And he never did it in a way that was mean, and he never did it in a way that was insulting. He never did it in a way that anyone lost their dignity, and he never did it in a way that was inappropriate. But he tilted windmills. And I think we should not forget that. It's important to keep the windmills in sight and to tilt at them. You know, reason, if reason could overcome the injustices that we live with in the field of dementia, we wouldn't have needed Richard. We needed a voice, and I think we should remember that that's what we have to keep up, and that's the greatest tribute we can do to him, is to remember that voice and not let it disappear with him. And you know, yes, it was Linda's support, and Linda never got angry, at least that I saw, and supported him in whatever he said. And I think we should be supporting each other in that being like Richard, in the sense of being upset and angry at all the injustices around us, and not forget that. And that would be the greatest tribute. So thank you.
Thank you so much, John. We've got one more speaker, two more speakers actually. I've just had someone put their hand up, say they'd like to speak, but I know Shibli Rahman in the UK, it's probably about 11:30 at night there, Shibli, so perhaps if you would like to say a few words, and then Michael Ellenbogen, and then I've got some tributes to read out.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I'd like to start by saying I never met Richard, but you can tell quite a lot about somebody from seeing them in action. And I'd like to say two things about Richard. First of all, he had enormous gravitas. He had enormous stature, and I agree he was tall, but it was more than that. He had immense power to make people listen to him. The other thing is a very rare gift, which I've only ever seen on a couple of occasions. That is, he made people feel special. Now, that's a very rare gift. I knew the impact Richard had on Kate, and on Al, in fact. Al Power in Perth came up to me and said, I'd like to talk to you about Richard Taylor. And we had to chat about Richard Taylor. And they were very moving, because that's how I first got a chance to speak to Al. Something that Richard once said was his definition of hope. And he defined this in Puerto Rico as follows, that tomorrow is going to be better than today. Now, think about that for a moment. There have been some lived experiences described to us, but I agree with our powers issue that it's all about connectedness. Richard, in fact, specifically said, I'm not the voice of Alzheimer's. I just happened to have this diagnosis. And I think Richard would be very proud of you all, in fact, if he had heard all the wonderful tributes, unmoved immensely. Now, I would like to just end with one theme, that is stigma. When Richard was given the diagnosis of dementia, he describes having cried for ages. And then it suddenly struck me, he actually did not really understand why his
I've lost your sound, Shibli. I completely lost sound then, so I'm not sure. Shibli, if you finished speaking.
I think he got disconnected somehow.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So 2 or 3 other speakers, and I know it's very late for you as well. Marc Wortman, who is Chief Executive of Alzheimer's Disease International, would just like to say a few words. Thanks, Marc.
Hello, Kate and everybody. I didn't prepare anything because we agreed that Glenn would speak on behalf of ADI, and he did it very well. I just wanted to say a few things. I met Richard quite a lot of times at ADI conferences, and we had a lot of discussions, sometimes debates, and you could very well disagree with Richard and still be on very good speaking terms. But I think what he has done, and nobody touched on it really yet, is I think he laid a foundation of this group of people here now in this call, bringing them together worldwide. And he worked hard on that. He asked me for a meeting at the ADI conference in Toronto in 2011 to engage with everybody who wanted to be there. There was a bit last minute, and we couldn't find a slot, and finally we decided on a breakfast meeting at 7 a.m. in the morning, the day after the conference dinner. And I went there with Jane, and I thought we will see Richard and maybe 1 or 2 others, but nobody else will show up. But to our surprise, there were 25 people coming to the meeting. It was really, really good. And this is where I think the idea for I Can, I Will popped up. Ultimately, I think that DAI was created through these kind of events. At least the foundation was laid for it. So we thank that to him. And I'm so proud to see everybody speaking out and standing up so much. And I think the conference in Perth was a landmark with so many people with dementia attending and speaking. That was even noticed outside of the dementia world, and in the NCD Alliance, where we are a partner in, the people who attended from the other disease areas were very impressed with that, and they said, oh, we have to learn from it. So that's really an achievement. But I think we thank to Richard to really be brave and say what you want and say what you think. We had to learn to accept that in our community, and it's happening now. So I'm very pleased that I can be in this call. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marc. And I think as far as I know, we've got 2 more speakers, Anna Sontag and then Michael. Sorry, Michael. Anna, are you still there or have you had to leave? Appears like she's still there, but not with us. Michael, would you like to say a few words? I know you've decided that at last minute. Michael Ellenbogen?
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, I was not going to say anything, but I just wanted to make sure, I guess people knew a little bit more about Richard than what was probably mentioned here today. Richard and I were friends for a long time, and we kind of held each other up throughout. But I have to tell you, since he has passed, as a person who's pretty close with him, I have learned things about Richard that I didn't even know. He has touched so many individuals out here, and it literally brings tears to my eyes because he's done so much more than I ever knew. And I really want to encourage everybody to continue the mission that he has tried to push on. I mean, he and I would argue all the time on, things he didn't agree and I didn't agree, but we were pushing each other to try to make things happen. And to be honest with you, Richard wasn't one who got me into this. I actually was doing this on my own, and we kind of met, and it was really great that he and I had the same viewpoints in so many different ways, even though there was times we disagreed. But what I think is important for people to know that nobody has mentioned here, it's because of him that the Alzheimer's support group was kind of working and being built for the Alzheimer's Association. He was on the first group, along with another woman who was I guess, a pioneer in her time, trying to make awareness for this. So it's what he did that has really had such a huge, and I mean a huge impact, that most people will never even know that it's because of him that we're where we're at today. I mean, the Alzheimer's Association wouldn't be recognizing people with dementia today. So I think it's very important for people to realize that he was a part of the first and a pioneer to be involved with that process. So I guess that's what I just want to make sure people understood about him.
Thank you, Michael. Is there anyone who's with us now who would also like? Oh, Anna, fantastic. You're still here.
Thank you. I was here. I just didn't have my mic. So I have something that I wrote. The journey of our lifetimes. The journey of a lifetime. Richard's. Ours. Many millions living with dementia. Communities of each one of them. Before and after the diagnosis, he was the same being, his own state unchanged. Yet a process began. Nothing would be as it was for Richard, for his loved ones, for the world. A journey of ongoing transformation for his life, the lives of those he loved. Then assumptions, conversations, relationships, programs, institutions, the planet. Through Richard's vision, commitment, tenacity, brilliance, and as the ultimate blessing to us all, Richard's glorious heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. I have a few tributes here that I need to read from other members of DAI and other people who couldn't be here. Dr. Jennifer Butte from the UK, it's just too late for her to stay up. She asked me to read out her tribute. So Jennifer said, I read Richard's book, Alzheimer's from the Inside Out, soon after my diagnosis, at a time when I read all the books available on the subject, and his was the only one that inspired me. Most of the others were unutterably depressing beyond words. I was also inspired that he used his past skills to learn from his daily frustrations and communicate them in a way that was familiar in order to help and inspire others. This was a real inspiration to me. The same thing with my past training, medical experience and teaching skills. I shall be ever grateful to him. I remember reading in his book about one incident where his family had completely misunderstood something he said. They certainly loved him dearly, but they had completely missed the point. I was struck in such a way that I've never forgotten. We must not assume others understand what we are saying, even if it is obvious and makes perfect sense to us. It is the misunderstanding of what we say that they are rejecting, not us. I first met Richard 3 years ago in London at the ADI conference when he, Kate, and I shared the same platform. We became friends and he had the amazing ability to make all of his friends feel special. He always replied to emails and was always encouraging and interested in what others were doing. I loved his frustration with the big pharma, as he called them, and agreed with him. Also, in his stance with the charities that were apparently more concerned with the future impossibility of a single cure, whenever was there one cure for cancer, than in enriching the lives of those of us already living with dementia. His cancer inevitably caused a dip, but he made an amazing recovery for a time, which said a great deal about his attitude. And he always continued to care for others and was involved until the end. I last saw him in a video message at a meeting with Kate, in London when he already knew time was running out. He was an amazing man and his legacy will certainly live on. Thank you, Richard. I have a message from a young woman in Nigeria Richard really did reach the whole world. A young woman called Kiki Edwards, who works in dementia care, and she's had internet issues, so couldn't be here today. She's asked me to say, how do we make the world a better place? We do so just the way Richard did, by infusing empathy into every individual we encounter. Did Richard know how much of an impact he had and continues to have in Nigeria? I know he saw how I religiously reposted his messages, all of which were in turn reposted. Words of wisdom, all of them. An insight into his duel with the fiend called dementia. In his last posts, it was evident he was struggling, but he still managed to put his thoughts across. I waited for comments, none of them came. I guess everybody was just like me, lost for words. Then I remembered some of his postings and videos I saw in the past. People, friends shy away because they don't know what to say, how to act around people diagnosed. At the end of the day, Richard is still Richard, irrespective of his diagnosis, was his message. I can't remember my exact comments to his last post. It was my usual one-liner. I just wanted him to know we were there with him and for him. Then, minutes later, the comments started flooding in like a deluge. Yes, we all paused, froze even. We all tried to visualise what he was going through. We all remembered his teachings. We all saw him speaking in our head. I am still Richard. Richard Taylor, I and Nigeria, thank you. And we have a couple of people who are in this meeting, this tribute, who actually want to speak before I read any of the other tributes that I've been asked to read. Lee and Judy and Shibli. Shibli, perhaps if you could finish your message first. I'm sorry you dropped out. And then Lee Cronky and Judy. Shibli, are you there?
Kate, you need to unmute him.
Okay. Shibli, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can now. I just unmuted you.
Yes, well, I'll say this briefly before I get cut off. Well, one of Richard's pet hates was people treating people with dementia as less than human, fading away, not all there. And I'd just like to leave you with one of the main messages Richard had for me working on dementia, that he emphasized people with dementia are whole persons. And he said, we need enablers, not disablers. Now, he was never one for fads or fashions. He set up a person-centered care. Well, if they're concentrating now on persons, what were they concentrating on before? Now, Al's already said, one of the things he said, but he also emphasized, how are you going to spend your life worrying about how you're going to die of dementia, or thinking about how you're going to live with dementia? And I think all of which is work on next month in Slovenia, there'll be a lot of discussion of the United Nations Convention on Rights for People with Disabilities. So Richard's work will be very much alive and well next month. And I'd like to say that Richard did warn us that there are people who are neither prevention nor cure are the issue. They just want to be living better with dementia. That is very important. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Shibli. I've forgotten who I said next. Lee and then Judy, and then I'll read out the last 2 or 3, and then we're going to listen to some music that Richard would have liked.
Unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
I've got a tremendous echo. We'll have to move on.
Lee, if you have on your phone and your computer, go ahead and turn your computer volume all the way down.
I'm only on my phone.
We're not getting anything from you, Lee. Perhaps we could move on to Judy and come back to you. Would that be all right? Judy, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, I didn't actually think that I would say anything today, but I really feel like I want to share with all the people who have shared their feelings and their emotions and how Richard has changed their life. You know, for me personally, I have no way to thank Richard and his family for sharing with me and with Julius, my husband, the actual feeling and emotion that he was going through on his journey with dementia. He came to Minnesota several times, stayed with us in our home, and as a little bit of a funny memory, I wanted to let people know that he stayed. We have bedrooms in the lower level of our house, and he stayed down there. And because our ceiling was a little bit low and Richard is very tall, we actually had to put blinking lights on places where the ceiling came down so that he wouldn't hit his head because he wasn't seeing it. And he would hit the place where like the heating ducts were hanging down. And so my husband figured out that if we put blinking lights down there, that would help him. And he always joked about it. And when he'd come, he wanted to know if we had the lights up in the basement so he could go down and sleep. And that was just, you know, we had so many fun times. And Richard trained my staff at Lakeview Ranch. He went there and just worked with them side by side and helped them understand what our residents were trying to say, which was just an amazing, amazing opportunity. And when I told staff that he had passed away, so many people were in tears. They just said there was no way that they could ever tell him or his family what a difference they'd made for him. And it was all about sharing his emotions. I do want to just say that the week before Richard passed away, he had called me on a Friday night, and we talked for about an hour, but a lot of what we talked about was he knew that his time here was limited, and he spoke about his feelings and his emotions and about his final days. And all I can say was that I wanted to share that with people, how much he spoke about all of you and the difference, and how he could never, ever connect with everybody and tell them what all of your friendship and love and support has been for him. And, you know, as he was leaving the main, as we were getting ready to hang up, the main thing that I wanted to say that I realized that no matter everything that he had gone through with his cancer and everything else, he was still Richard. And I want to offer my condolences to his family. And again, like Kim had said, thank you for sharing him with the rest of the world. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you so much, Judy. I've got a message from Keith Oliver from the UK, who's a person living with dementia, and I know he and Richard were very close. And Keith wanted to say, whilst there is a growing number of people coming forward to express what living with dementia is really like, no one has done so with the eloquence, humility, and positive impact which Richard brought to the cause. In preparing today for a radio interview, I was mindful of Richard and turned, as I do from time to time, to his remarkable book, Alzheimer's from the Inside Out. The book is like the man, inspiring. When I first met Richard at the ADI conference in London, March 2012, we immediately hit it off. His comment written to me in his book, which I eagerly purchased, said it all when he wrote, "To Keith, we are kindred spirits. It is my honour to meet you. Best wishes on your journey. Thank you for making a friend of me, Richard." The honour was entirely mine, and it was to Richard I turned when Reinhard Gus and I were setting up the Forget-Me-Not group in Kent. Richard's advice was, as always, clear, direct, relevant, thoughtful, and extremely helpful. Richard and I also shared the background of being teachers, he in university and me in primary elementary schools. Age of student may have been different, but we shared the desire to make a positive difference to those in our care, those who were on a learning journey. Although dementia brought both our careers to a halt, it could never fail to halt this desire, and it is to the world of dementia where his skills were so brilliantly applied. As I often say, one door closes and one door opens. Thank you, Richard, for helping to prise the door ajar and then to help push it open wider for those of us with dementia. Another message from Brenda Avadian, who has a website called The Caregiver's Voice. Unfortunately, we lost one of the great voices with dementia last month. Houston-based psychologist Dr. Richard Taylor, who raised awareness by writing and talking about Alzheimer's from the inside out. And then from Frida Colley in the UK. Although you, Richard, have never met me, your online friendship, encouragement, support and information, plus your awareness raising in the community and amongst medics, have helped me and other people with dementia and carers to keep calm and carry on, even tentatively or confidently to take up the baton and run for a while. Your newsletter and groups, the webinars, etc., your humour, even the Facebook games occasionally, help to bring that vital human contact here in my very quiet little one-person residence. Travel in peace with our thoughts and prayers. Thank you from Frida. So there are all the messages that I've been asked to read out. I'm sure there are probably many others. What I'd like to do now is to put a picture on the screen and play some music. Before we started today, I had playing in the background a piece of Mozart that Richard's son Jason had said Richard really liked. Richard and I had some pretty similar musical tastes, including a lot of classical music. And he loved Wagner, as did I, but I didn't think Wagner was probably the one for most people today. So the piece I'll play in a moment is another one I'm sure he would have loved. If I can, bear with me while I sort out how to do this.
Kate, I just want to thank you and just say I'm so amazed you're doing such a great technical job with all of us on here. You're hurting all of us cats.
I second that. She did a wonderful job.
Thank you. I'll just put this music on, and then if I can work out how to, I'll put a picture of Richard on the screen. But I wanted to thank you all very much. I wish we could all hang around, have a cup of coffee, share a few tears and a lot of hugs. But it's been an absolute privilege and honour to be able to host today. So thank you everyone for being here to honour and talk about, oops, hang on, sorry. Sorry about that.